Hi, everyone. I'm glad to see your smiling faces here. On behalf of the Glaze, we'd like to extend a very special welcome to each of you to join Sharing Global Views today. Sharing Global Views is a series of conversations and discussions. So far, we've covered many fascinating topics, such as in the first episode, Meet Jose Maria, Meet Antarctica. Mr. Figueres shares his stories about Antarctica and protecting the environment. In the second episode, Luis Pugh brings us to a journey of swimming in freezing waters, including the Antarctica, and he listens in and takes his ocean conservation messages to the world. And the third episode from snake serum to COVID-19 therapy and Chinese medicine in the future, 2 billion doctors from Costa Rica and China have excellent communications here in Sharing Global Views. We then talk about using AI to connect global businesses, boost the digital economy, and cross-border trade, and the power and potential of the sharing economy. So anything interesting today?
Hi, Helena. Welcome to Sharing Global Views. This morning, from the American time zone, we're enjoying a very nice cup of tea. Welcome, everybody, also from the European time zone, African time zone, for their after lunch tea, and in the Asian time zone for their evening tea. Sharing Global Views is a program for global opinion leaders, young professional post graduates, undergraduates, and anyone that exchanges ideas and perspectives on how the sharing economy could help the world business from their own perspective and their own achievements. Last week, we had Daniel, co-founder of Transact Financials, to share on his views on how to use fintech blockchain to boost the digital economy and cross-border trade, together along with the chairman of the African Chamber of Commerce in China, where he talked about cross-border trade and business between countries. But today we have another topic relating to Africa, also other suitable regions with developing economies, talking about how to benefit with the use of technology and the platform. Explained last time, we could see how there are all these essential needs that still need to be tackled, like food and shelter. So with this, let me introduce standing chair of GLACE, former president of Costa Rica, Jose Maria Figueres, to introduce GLACE and our main speaker today.
Thank you so much, and ladies and gentlemen, thank you ever so much for joining us on this new edition of Sharing Global Views. This is brought to you by GLACE, the Global Alliance for the Sharing Economy, a concept that we promote globally because we believe it is the future of economics and of good, sound environment and development. On the one side, we have a growing global population that deserves to live much better. And on the other side, we have a finite planet with finite resources that have to be shared in a better way if we're going to make livelihoods be much more meaningful for everyone on the planet. So Sharing Global Views is all about, as Godfrey and Elena mentioned, about the sharing economy, promoting this across borders, across nations, from a business perspective, with tremendous opportunities for entrepreneurs and all involved. Today in our conversation, we have Dr. Michel Loots, who is the founder and director of a very, very particular organization called the Tridealhouse Housing Solution. Michel has been looking at and studying housing solutions for many, many, many years. And in the course of those years, he came up with a very interesting idea of exploring what more than 15 UN organizations had already done in terms of researching what are the best housing opportunities, how can people live better. And this is such an important topic because For most of us on the planet, our home is our most important asset in economic terms, but even much more important than that, it is where we live, where we enjoy with our family, where we provide a tremendous amount of the education to our children, and where we really gather and develop in our livelihoods. So in the exploring of everything that the UN organizations has done about housing, he found some commonalities that are able today to solve 80, 90% of the challenge of slums in urban areas around the world and the housing challenge at large. So with that, let me turn it over to you, Michael, and thank you ever so much for the research that you have done, for exploring what the UN, United Nations, has already come out with in this respect, and for having brought all of that together in a comprehensive package of recommendations that we can implement along the lines of a sharing economy in the planet and the world of today. Michael, the floor is yours. You're on mute, Michael. There you go.
Yes. Hello. Thank you very much, President Figueres. I also thank GLACE and Business Without Borders to give me the opportunity to present Tridealhouse. As you said, I'm a medical doctor. I also studied economics, but after that, I spent 25 years, part of my life at the service of the UN organizations, trying to compile the best practices and to help transfer all the knowledge. And I realized then that most of the problems that are now related to the Sustainable Development Goals, they already have been solved one way or another by expert reports or by intensive studying of the UN organizations. But unfortunately, just like ministries in a country, all these solutions are in one particular field, the field of activity of this UN organization. And so what we did is, particularly for housing, looking at how can we find a common solution for the urban slum problem? And we compiled, in fact, composed based on the existing solutions, the solution of the Tridealhouse, of which I have prepared the presentation. And so if I may share my screen, then I will, yes, that view. I will share my screen. Is it visible, the screen?
Yes, it is perfectly visible.
Okay. Yep.
Beautiful slides.
Yeah, so the Tridealhouse is a solution we developed based on all these UN knowledge to solve the urban slum problem. And the urban slum problem is one of the most persistent and difficult to solve global problems, SDG problems, sustainable development problems. And what we, about 1 billion people are affected. So this means about 300 million urban slum families, of which 60 million is in Africa. And the problem is, of course, the basic needs are not met. There is enormous concentration of poor people on small areas around the cities. They are too poor to acquire any house, and they are trapped in poverty and also in malnutrition. And therefore, they cannot participate in the economy, and it's a kind of perpetual cycle of poverty. And actually, Warren Buffett said that the bottom billion, that's the most difficult to solve, because they don't have the means to get from 0 to 10. And what we developed based on all the UN knowledge is the Tridealhouse solution, which is a self-financing and food-producing house to address the urban slum poverty and malnutrition. And as you see here, the house inside, it's not because it's triangular that it's not comfortable and that it can be very nice to live. And so we try to develop something which meets all the needs of the people. Now, to solve this solution, and this is for this house, but in general, I want to share the solution for many SDGs. You need 3 ingredients, in our opinion. The first is knowledge. But most knowledge, best practices to solve most of the Sustainable Development Goals problems, they already have been published and found out, in fact, by the most of UN organizations and also official development organizations in universities. So we didn't invent this house, we composed it from all these solutions, and these are validated solutions. So that's the first thing. The second is, if you want to solve something for 300 million people, 300 million houses for 1 billion people, of course, it has to be an industrial solution with industrial production technologies for optimal efficiency, production, quality, meeting the CO2, etc. So we have to get know-how from this industry and meet with them and partner with them. And then, particularly to solve the urban slum problems, we need 5 essential stakeholders, and all 5 are needed. The first, of course, is the government, and we are fortunate to have a very good cooperation with the Ethiopian government as first government to work with for our piloting. And so the government has to provide the land, the financing part, regulations, and they can be co-owner of the project. The second are the UN organizations, because they can provide the international validation. In every house we develop, there is about 70% common, let's say, knowledge or common solutions, and then 30% solutions have to be provided locally. But the 70% common solutions have to be validated. They have to be best practices. We shouldn't have people reinvent things which are not okay. And then the other aspect of the UN is, of course, there is a small percentage, 30 to 40% of the cost of the housing, and this includes investments in local factories, which needs foreign currency at the start. So with the validation of the UN, we can get financing of the World Bank, European Investment Bank. We had very good first connections and discussions with them. Universities are very important. 30% of the houses have to be adapted locally. What kind of vegetables are we going to grow? What kind of fruits or micro livestock? What are the local norms, etc.? How to adapt this optimally? And then, of course, we need cooperation with the industry for efficiency, productivity, and scaling up. We ourselves, we only want to be active in the urban slums. So this means we are not going to be competitive with the free market. And therefore, and that's already proven, we have very good collaboration with industrial partners who are willing to advise us and share some production facility so that we can create kind of joint ventures. And finally, of course, for everything, there is financing need. So I focus a little bit on this slide because it's important. These 3 ingredients are there, and they are there in our project. Then I can go a little bit faster on the other slides, but as I told, we are using validated UN information, and for slums, UN Habitat is very important. So what are 5 essential solutions for slums? You need access to water, but we are collecting the water in water tanks. You need sanitation facilities. There will be an individual toilet with also using either Oxfam, tiger worm, or there are 5 or 6 variants we are going to use. The durability of the housing is essential. So we want to make houses which last 50 to 80 years. And there are many reasons for this. One is, of course, poor people have no money to maintain their house. And if the house is collapsing after 10, 15 years, they don't have anything anymore because they have been financing this without having an asset. And for example, in Africa, the population is going to expand the next 80 years. So if in addition to tripling the population, you have to rebuild the houses every 2 years, 20 years, this is not efficient. So from the start, we have to include durability of 50 to 80 years, which is technically possible. And it doesn't require a lot of more investment, maybe 10, 20% more cost. There has to be sufficient living area, so people have to be able to live in dignity and secure tenure. But of course, in our case, because the house is modular, we can also create a kind of blockchain mechanism for this. But this doesn't solve these 5, the access to urban slum housing, because as we know, it's expanding even the problem. These are preconditions. So we added a 6th element, which is called urban farming and microjob with food production. And this is the element which makes Tridealhouse a house that can be repaid because it's generating revenues. Now, it has to be created and built industrially. In our case, it will be modular, so that the quality is constant and guaranteed, and also the productivity to create the houses is much higher. Of course, every house has to be adapted to local colors and habits and arrangements. And the most important and the main question is, can a house generate $1,000 per year? If we can answer positively on this question, then the global slum problem can be solved because the house can be repaid. And for example, we calculated that if there could be 5 to 8 chicken per house and there will be room for 5 to 8 chicken, this produces 1,500 eggs per year. This is a revenue of $150 to $200 or of course local currency equivalent. This is one crop, but we will have 5 to 10 different type of crops like this. And also in developing countries with the tropical climates, you can have 2, 3, maybe even 4 crops per year. So therefore, when we add everything, we think every house can produce reasonably between $1,500 and $2,000 equivalent of food per year. And this is sufficient to repay it. But of course, a house is not enough. It has to be climate resilient. And we saw it last week in the Philippines with enormous hurricanes who are destroying, in this case, the image shows in Yolanda 8 years ago, I think, 1 million houses. So the good thing about a triangular house is that it's very stable and the steel profiles can be adapted to the strongest hurricanes in that region. And of course, on top of the house, we will have solar collection. It's also very important. A house is, of course, not a home till the community is integrated, until it is a happy environment to live. And I give the example of what we call what is called Happy City, which is a Canadian organization who is researching all aspects of what makes a house or a living environment a happy environment, where we feel safe, where the community involvement is promoted, and where there is safety, nature, and exposure to positive contacts and experiences. So if we can create a house which generates $1,000 revenue minimum per year, then almost every slum family could afford such a house. We can also adapt the house a little bit. Normally it's foreseen for 4 people. It could be a little bit smaller, then it's cheaper for 3 persons. It could be for 5 persons. We could connect 2 or 3 houses, one after the other. So, but basically they could be financing a house. And at that moment, it's not charity anymore. It is a legitimate humanitarian industrial business, which is profitable with a transparent profit margin and which can be scaled up. But of course, to scale it up, we need cooperation with the industry because you need to provide millions of houses. So it is impossible to do this as a small organization. We have to create joint ventures. We have to have the government cooperation, etc. And at that moment, it can be scaled up. So Tridealhouse fulfills 12 of 17 of the Sustainable Development Goals. And this is, of course, because at the basis, we integrated all the knowledge and the know-how of the UN organizations in order to integrate all these different SDGs. I can take only one: responsible consumption and production. It's very important that people are able to produce locally in the urban city vegetables and some small micro livestock, and then they can trade it locally. So this means the consumption is not brought by products who are shipped 20, 50, or sometimes 100 or 200 kilometers. So we participated last year in the UN Habitat Assembly of Governments for Innovation for Better Quality of Life, and we were also broadcasted on ASBC News and in other countries in Africa. And this is the small 1/3 prototype. We are actively working now on the full sizes, which will be shipped in Ethiopia in about 2 months, 3 months. And then we will start producing the first 20 to 50 there early next year. We can incorporate a lot of know-how, but the know-how has to be adapted to developing countries. So the maximum of foreign currency component can be 30%. because if it's more, then it will not be possible to finance this macroeconomically. For 30%, it will be possible to get loans of the World Bank, European Investment Bank, and foreign currency components. So we have to find solutions, durable solutions with local materials. And one of them is concrete. And we will use, for example, foam concrete and ultra high strength concrete, for which we also have a joint venture and create some solutions. For example, in Ethiopia, they have a lot of basalt, and they are, the government has commissioned, is building 5 basalt rebar factories, and the basalt rebars are very durable, so they are not rusting, so they are creating concrete which doesn't deteriorate after 5 or 10 or 20 years in tropical climates. And so we will integrate a lot of know-how also from university partners, from local partners, etc. Important is that we will also recycle the water because the house is built on water tanks, is collecting on the footprint around 15 to 25 cubic meter of water per year, which should be sufficient to cover minimum half a year, maybe more, of agriculture, urban farming, but also personal sanitation needs. So there are 8 necessary dimensions for sustainable outreach. First, the price per house has to be around $10,000, ideally around $8,000. We calculated for every $1,000 more than $8,000, probably 8 to 10% less slum people could afford it. So it's important to create mass production, but also at very low cost, and this means using local raw materials. It has to be a modular system. We cannot create these houses on site because the concrete quality is not guaranteed, etc. The durability has to be more than 80 years. And for example, for the grids on which people walk, they have to be transparent to let the sun through. We will use polyester phthalate grids, which are really lasting for a lot of years, which are not rusting, etc. Of course, we have to conform to building codes. Urban farming has to be included. 75% of the materials have to be sourced nationally or regionally. Actually, it can become also a source of GDP growth. And we have to cooperate with the government, UN, etc. And our idea is to create factories near the cities, and we want to employ also part of the slum people, because basically they have a lot of potential also if they get the right training and environment to work. Now, the most important, of course, is money. How to scale this financially? So we are, let's say, a startup, already 2 years. We have found some initial foundations who support us, but to scale it up, we need investments. And so there are not 8 types of investments we can rely on. But the power of this system is that the local loans, housing loans given to finance the Tridealhouse, it's not a consumption loan. It's a productive loan. And if you invest as a government in a production loan in a factory or in a Tridealhouse, which is producing, which is increasing the GDP, if you create this money or this loan, it's not generating inflation, because this is the big problem when as a country you are printing money and you're giving loans, but it generates a lot of inflation and tears down the economy. The Tridealhouse increases the GDP of the country with the $1,000 or $2,000 worth of food which is produced, and at the same time of the factories who are producing those Tridealhouses. Therefore, the loans can be given with minimal impact on the inflation. And this is very important to scale it up. And therefore, if we get to 30% support, and there was indication of a World Bank, European Investment Bank, Ethiopia to support us, that's a foreign currency component at the start of the project, in the procurement phase. After that, there will be no foreign currency to maintain the house, but that will not be needed. But the local currency, it can be provided without inflation risk by the government, and that's very important. So I conclude here, we are a team now and it's growing. We have about 15 organizations and universities who join us with their experts and advisors, and we are ourselves around 5 people. And also, of course, Dr. Fasika Kelemework, which is our director, Ethiopia and Africa, has also a number of assistants and collaborators. So we are starting with a lot of enthusiasm, and we think it should be a good example of how to solve world problems, but in cooperation with a lot of stakeholders. So we invite every person, our organization or industry who is interested to contact us and to see how on short or longer term we could collaborate. So thank you very much. Tridealhouse. So we see this a bit like a vaccination against poverty. So we are, for the moment, a laboratory developing a vaccination. Thank you.
Michael, thank you so much for a very engaging presentation. I love the holistic aspect of not only providing a solution, which is a home, but also doing so in a way where you can produce food and you can make it into a productive element, as you mentioned. How do you see the role of the private sector in this? How do you see the role of business? How do you foresee, what have you talked with businesses globally? How do you see them participating in this kind of an effort?
Yeah, of course, the businesses is very important. Luckily now businesses become more and more aware they have to contribute somewhat to the SDG, but also that it's a business opportunity. So what we are doing is, just as one example, the steel profiles we are using, we want to create very durable steel profiles. And one of the companies who developed one of the most durable steel of the world is ArcelorMittal, and they developed what they call Magnelis steel. This means a steel which is covered with 10 or 20 microns of magnesium, aluminium, and zinc. And that makes the steel 3 times more durable. So we had, actually this steel was invented in Flanders, where I live, and in a joint venture with the Flemish government. So we visited the people of ArcelorMittal and of OCAS, which invented this, and they are willing to help us in the first stage, and after that to help us maybe in a further stage. But of course, we have to prove now we can create this house, because I try to develop a vaccine. It's like a tree. You develop a new type of apple or potato or maize to be resistant to drought or whatever. You have to imagine that it's used all over the world. And so, for example, just if you would solve the Tridealhouse, the urban slum poverty, and use Tridealhouse, this requires about 50 million tons of this steel during 10 years. This means 10 full steel factories. So it is an important economic incentive and factor, and we are not asking them to give this steel in charity. We are just asking to get the most beneficial or price that they would give to their best clients. So that's the only thing we are asking, and that's one example. And of course, you need also the cement. You need some polyesters, etc. And so we are directly targeting these big organizations and asking if they can help us as small players now, but potentially as big partners in a later phase.
Thank you. I want to turn it over in a minute to Godfrey and to Elena. I'm sure we have questions that are coming in through a LinkedIn website for Glaze. But just one last one. Michael, I find the concept of going back and revisiting everything that UN organizations have researched over so many years a very down-to-earth, creative, and fascinating concept. I mean, it's such common sense. They must have researched just about everything that we need to solve on the planet. So just as you have researched solutions here on housing, I feel that we could go into those organizations, visit their websites, and find solutions to many other problems. Please, in a couple of minutes, if you're so kind, describe to us the process that you have gone through with all of these UN organizations to find out and bring together the best-in-class information, and also share with us if you have gone back after you have done this to any UN organization and what their reaction has been.
Well, thank you very much for this question. Yes, 25 years ago, I wanted, when I finished as a doctor and also studied a little bit economy, etc., I wanted to go to Africa and build. Okay, so some people, they won't continue to build. I'm an entrepreneur, so you put me in the desert instead of crying. I will try to find out what I can do with the sand, etc. And I realized I need information. I'm not going to reinvent the wheel. So then I started to contact some UN organizations to buy their books, but they said, okay, a book is $25 or $30. And say, oh, I need so many books. I need minimum 50 to 100 books with a solution that I want to implement. I cannot do this. Is there another way to get this free on a CD, or CDs were coming up? And no, they weren't. Actually, the UN at that moment were printing in general 2,000 to 3,000 books of any solution they had. 1,000 books went to repository libraries everywhere in the world, and the other 1,000, they had this publishing department, which had to be self-financing, so they were obliged to sell it in order to finance the republishing of the books. And at that moment, so I visited New Zealand to a professor there to develop a software for CDs. We got some money from UNESCO, and we developed an open source software, Greenstone, which is now used, I think, 3,000, 4,000 universities around the world. Even the Indian governments are using this open source software. And this software allowed us to create these digital collections. And then we had some help from GTZ, now GIZ. And I started a company in Romania to digitize this. And it's the same like to Tridealhouse. Half the digitalization was for free. Actually, I invested even part of my profits. And we developed another business software to, with a partner to finance this. And so that's how, during 20 years, even if it was not my goal, I scouted all the UN agencies, and most of the time they were very helpful, and they didn't realize they had so many useful information, but there was no one also in the world willing to do this at such a low cost and with this quality. And so because we had, I think, 60 people in Romania doing the scanning of these millions of pages during tens of years. And so that's how we compiled everything. At a certain point, I realized I couldn't create all these CDs, so we offered the CD collection services so that they can distribute it, put it on their website. And at the end, I must say, all UN organizations share their information on their website, but not necessarily all the publications, not necessarily all the publications, and also it's not easy for people either to find it, especially except if you're a specialist, but now also they do it in PDF. So this means the granularity of the information is a PDF, and you have to be university degree almost educated to look at a PDF file or a book and to extract the information. I can do this in a few minutes in any book, but it's difficult if you don't have a university training. And what we did before is trying to convert everything into HTML. In HTML, you could have it, the granularity of the information is on the level of the paragraph or even the sentence, and you can have everything translated. And so generally, I must say the UN is, of course, extremely helpful. They are sharing most of the information, but it's still extremely difficult to find the solutions. And what we did is, of course, compiling everything we know is there for this Tridealhouse solution.
Thank you, Michael. Michael, we have, I see on the screen here participating with us, Yves Leterme, who is former Prime Minister of Belgium and a distinguished leader globally of the Glaze community. And I just wanted to say hello, Yves, and invite you to come in and participate in this edition of Global Sharing Views at whatever point in time you may wish to do so, Yves. Thank you for being here. You're on mute, Yves. I see you're talking, but you're on mute.
Is that better?
Now that's perfect. Fantastic. No. You're on mute again. You just put yourself on mute again, Yves. I'm sorry.
Does that work? Yeah.
Perfect now. Thank you.
Yeah, very briefly, thank you for your kind words, and thank you for the opportunity for Michael to present Tridealhouse. I was struck by the initiative and also struck by the fact that it's a very down-to-earth kind of solution initiative that tries to solve one of the big issues in contemporary life. I happen to be also a goodwill ambassador for an organization that looks after homelessness. And this is the kind of, let's say, practical and very concrete work where Glaze, I think, could make a difference. And as you mentioned yourself, the role of the private sector, trying to find the real win-win situation is, of course, part of the exercise. So I'm very happy that we can engage in that conversation. And I'm very much looking forward to hear about ideas, how to bring this initiative further and how to connect it to interested people in the Glaze community, and more particularly, how to identify private enterprises that could be interested in supporting the initiative. I think what was mentioned about ArcelorMittal is already very important. Well, thank you very much. And of course, I'm also proud that it is a Belgian Flemish initiative supported by people I very much appreciate. Please.
Yves, thank you for your comments. Wonderful to have you here with us. We hope to have you more often, but this is a fantastic initiative. And ever since we had the first conversation with Michael several weeks ago, we, of course, decided that this was something that we had to showcase and see, as you say, well, Yves, how we can gather momentum around this. So, Godfrey and Elena, let me turn it over to you for questions that may have come in from our audience.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President. Actually, we have
sorry, I didn't understand
some
the
other
question.
questions.
We lost you for a minute, Elena. We lost you.
Okay, sorry, I'm gonna repeat the question again. What kind of urban farming are you going to foresee? The question from our LinkedIn page.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. So we're not going to do just one type of farming. We are going to integrate 5 or 7 different type of system, even some with some earth and also, of course, the micro livestock. And just to give some examples, you can when I did the digitalization of a lot of publications, there were a series called the Food and Nutrition Bulletin of the SEN, the Subcommittee of Nutrition of the United Nations, which connects all the researchers of the United Nations. And they publish publications about what kind of ideal proteins are needed for the children, what kind of micronutrients are needed, sodium or iodium or all kind of other vitamins, etc. So we have also lists of hundreds of vegetables which are providing a certain amount of vitamins or proteins. And so the ideal situation is to look at this list of vegetables or fruits who are providing certain types of micronutrients needed for a certain region, and then match this with what is available locally. And this could be special types of fruits, but also we'll have some chicken, but you can also have mini kind of caviars and all kind of other micro livestock, which together create a kind of redundancy that if there is some disease or some problem, you can always have other type of crops who are providing, and also it provides market variability.
Thank you so much for the answer. I hope that answers the question properly. Now, we also have an audience, Richard Burden, actually in the Zoom group. Richard, do you want to present yourself with your question?
Well, I had thank you very much, and I'm very delighted to have been able to participate. So I'm Richard Burton. I work for Tojoy in Europe. But I'm very pleased that a European project is progressing in Glaze. So, I mean, Dr. Loots, it was really, I made a comment that in my world as an investor and seek investment, and we're coming across more and more. I mean, you rightly pointed out that companies themselves have got ESG initiatives and ESG objectives, and more shareholders are pushing companies to have very robust ESG policies. So I think what you discussed with ArcelorMittal is an example and can be extended to other companies and other very much, but there are also more and more funds, private funds being created, which are called impact funds, if you like. I think that's the generally accepted. And I wondered whether you had contact or been interacting with any of these funds and what kind of reception you'd been getting. Thank you.
Yeah, most of the funds, they are telling me that in general they accept 1 or 2%, so 1 or 2 of the hundreds they receive, so they get overwhelmed by it. But somehow we get already one big funding. We started with small philanthropic investors for the first 100,000 euros about 1.5 years ago. But then after submitting to all kind of impact investors, there is a Happel Foundation, and Mr. Happel was one of the main industrialists in Germany who owned factories, who create machinery, etc. And they have a foundation, Happel Foundation in Switzerland, and they agreed to fund the first, let's say, $200,000, followed by a follow-up investment by stages. This means the first 5 houses and then the next 20 houses in order to help us. But for our project, it was quite difficult because we fit in no category. Let's say we fulfill actually all these SDGs, but they are looking at the 14 SDGs which are not fitting in their portfolio or in their pipeline. So it was quite difficult for us to convince foundations also because actually we didn't have at that moment a full prototype. So we had a very small prototype, but luckily we got the first one. And we think that once we get the full ones, it will not be a problem because we met the European Investment Bank country manager in Ethiopia, which also have contacts, of course, with the rest of Africa. We went to met the IFC, International Finance Corporation country director, and they said, yeah, if you succeed, because those organizations typically give 50 million subsidies or loans, but in our case, they were willing to start with 3 or 5 million to start the factory. They said, okay, if you validate the first 20 to 30 of your houses and you get the support of the government, but the minister was with me when I visited them, then you will not have any problem for us to fund your first 3 or 4 million that you need. And if that succeeds, we will help you all over the world to set up these factories. Even I have friends of FAO in Pakistan who are saying, yes, once it's ready, please, we will introduce you to the government here, because the needs of the slum housing is everywhere, it's pressing. So we think that we have to now to get through this ceiling, the glass ceiling. It's not for women only, it's also for humanitarian entrepreneurs. And we hope, we are hopeful that we will succeed.
Thank you so much, Michael, for your brilliant answers. So Godfrey, do you have any question there?
Yeah, well, I find it very interesting. I myself, I'm a very big fan of modular building and architecture. And I was wondering how you foresee the building quality and you mentioned it's 50 to 80 years. That's really remarkable, especially for slum housing in particular. So how do you plan to tackle that?
Yeah. Well, 50 to 80 years, it's not, let's say the current result is one of the conditions, because actually it doesn't matter 30 or 40 years or 80 years. It's a little bit modulation of the product, but it's more the difference between, is it going to collapse in 15 to 20 years, or should it be repainted every 10 years? This means people will have to choose between giving food to their children or painting their house. It's clear what they will do. They will give food to their children. So therefore, at inception, it has to be calculated for 50 to 80 years. So we had another company, Valuation Technologies, also Flemish know-how with Vito, which developed a system to separate fly ash to create with superfine fly ash extremely durable concrete. You can create super strong concrete which lasts actually 2,000 or 3,000 years. So that's the first ingredient we will use. The second, and that's why I went to ArcelorMittal, because they invented this Magnelis steel with the help of the Flemish government, because that steel, it will last 50 to 70, 80 years, even unpainted. And it's not a major more cost to do it at inception. Maybe it's 10% more in the material cost or 20% more, but the durability of the housing is much longer. The grids on which people walk, because of course you have these kind of stairs and the grids to do the urban farming, we will use polyester phthalate. And even there, you can choose to have ultraviolet retarders. And even the ultraviolet will only affect a little bit the first 2 millimeters. So this will also last. Like they say, you know, you cannot destroy plastic. You cannot destroy polyester phthalate, because that's what the windmills are made of. So it's the choice of the materials from the start. It requires a little bit more investment, but durability is so long that people will be able to count on this house as a pension fund, in fact, because that's another problem. Retirement and old age in developing countries, people do not have any support. So that's how we will do the 50 to 80 years, the material choice. And of course, you have to build this in a factory. You have to create modules in a totally controlled environment where you use good, I wouldn't say Toyota-like, because this is maybe too expensive or difficult in developing goods, but extremely good quality monitoring systems to be sure that the concrete and the modules are made exactly to the quality criteria. And then you can have a house which will last 50 to 80 years, and it's modular anyway, so you can replace one module and not having to rebuild your complete house. It's based on steel profile, so it's possible to actually 80% can be reused.
Thank you, Dr. Loots. I think just to add another comment, I think this opens another thought on, well, how it's also a circular system where not only do you have the housing, you are tackling food, water, energy, but also with this process, you would also have to engage in education, where you have to, well, it's part of the process where you learn how to keep the house, you learn how to pass it on, and I mean, if I get the housing now, right, I would definitely pass it on to the next generation, or how could I do that? That leaves some space in the model of financing as well. Like, can I buy the house? Can I pass it on? Or what happens if I cannot pay the house? I think that leads to many other questions.
Yeah,
but it's really impressive.
Well, just to briefly, so the durability of the house, of course, is an asset for long term. So then, of course, you have longer term to pay it. But there is, of course, the problem of population explosion. And one of the reasons people have a lot of children is, of course, it's not only about education, but also the security. Because if you are very poor and you have a lot of children, but on the other hand, if you have an asset which is limited in terms of production of food, because the house can reasonably produce food for 3 people, maybe for 4 people, but not for 6 or 7 people. Otherwise, you have to extend, put double houses. Then it's reasonable to conceive that people will not see their children as a pension asset, but as their house as a pension asset, because the house can provide for the food, can provide for. So it's possible that it could contribute to diminishing of the population explosion, because it gives this security. And so there are many aspects of this. Of course, if people cannot repay, I said, in principle, because the governments give the loan, and they can create this money without generating too much inflation, even if people would not repay it, it would still be okay, because the GDP is expanding, the security in the country is expanding, etc. So to a certain extent, the government can extend the loan longer, but of course, it's not a charity project. So the houses have to be repaid. We spoke with people in Addis Ababa in the slums, and they are going to work as a kind of day laborer on those building projects, and they earn $100 to $150 per month. So they should be able to repay. And it's not our responsibility to solve the allocation of the houses or to solve the social issues when people do not repay anything. That's the government responsibility.
I have one
Thank
last
you,
question
Mike,
before
for the
I give
answer.
back to Helena.
Okay.
So I'm based here in Costa Rica, and for me, the slum issue is actually quite visible within the whole region, right, in Latin America. So where do you foresee in terms of adaptability and internationalization of Tridealhouse? I think it's a great project. It's highly adaptable, as you said. It's modular and it tackles many issues. So I just wanted to close off my part by asking you where you see that.
Hi. Well, first of all, as you see, I'm now, and I'm very honored to be one of the first, I mean, you are one of the first Business Without Borders in which I can present this more globally. Of course, we are open to share this idea, to cooperate, etc. But in any case, 30% of every house has to be adapted locally. And it's not only about the structure, it's also about the community engineering, it's about how to fit this, etc. in the environment. And that's with local universities. So that's a very successful model that we have. We work with 4 universities in Flanders. We work with ASTU University. We have requests from other universities, but for the moment we focus on Ethiopia. So that's the model. In fact, the 5 stakeholders, you need them in every country. So if you have a partner willing to create or a foundation or ourselves or whatever, to create this kind of networking with 5 partners and to have one entrepreneur, putting the motion, and then you could 70% could be brought by us, or let's say by the industries we are collaborating, and 30% should be done locally. And then, in my opinion, it's possible to adapt this because the needs are the same. The needs of the poorest, to bring them from 0 to 10, are quite identical everywhere. Of course, it's different in every culture. Costa Rica is not Africa, or Colombia is not India, etc.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I'm done with my questions.
Thank you, Godfrey. Thank you, Michael. So I think Michael not only answered question why the house has the last 50 to 8 years, also answered the question why people cannot repay the house. Here is another interesting question: how to protect the crops from being harvested by the neighbors in the night? So I think it's quite interesting.
Yeah, of course, because if you have a house, especially in Africa or in developing countries, you can have 3 to 4 crops per year. And so imagine these delicious strawberries. Well, in Belgium, we eat a lot of strawberries. I don't know in many other countries, and apples and who knows. So there are 3 ways to protect this. The first, let's say the first more evident are the physical ways. We have you have different levels, and you have the grids on which you have to walk, and so it's possible to close this somehow. And it's also possible to enclose the house a little bit, etc. Let's say the classical, you can also put some bells there when someone is trying to, so that's the typical physical that is used everywhere. But for me, the more important one is the community one, because it's not the vegetables and the fruits. Let's say the bad quality ones are used for daily usage of the people themselves, but the good quality ones, the one who look nice, etc., they should be sold. But you cannot just sell some strawberries or some apples or some other type of vegetables or fruits to the market like this. You have to cooperate with your neighbors, actually create a community where you start to specialize and you start to produce in order to meet the consumers' needs, or to meet how you want to sell. For example, you produce 5 eggs a day, you're using 2 for yourself, but you have 3 eggs. You're not going to go to market for 3. So the second protection level is when you have 50 or 100 of those houses, where you have the community who are organizing themselves and who are helping this, which is also for a part garden, kind of a guardian of this, together with the physical. You can also have a dog, etc. But then the third one, discussions with UN Habitat, they said, so for the moment you can have 2,500 of those Tridealhouses per square kilometer. That's about 10,000 people in a slum. But the average slums have a density of 50, 100, sometimes 150. There are even who have 200,000 people per square kilometer. So UN Habitat said to us, listen, this is going to take too much space. Can you have another concept also to put this on a first floor? And this was from the start our goal, to create 50, the first floor as a kind of closed first floor, which is a normal concrete house, let's say, and to put the 50 Tridealhouse on top of it. And then you have a totally closed inner garden. I call this a kind of a small garden of Eden, where you have in fact a total protection of the neighborhood. So on one hand, you have two levels of housing, the ground level, which has connection to the inner garden, and you have the top Tridealhouse, which is the garden on the roof, let's say. But the inner garden can be a combination of playing ground for children. You can have some boats there, so some animals which are too big to fit in the Tridealhouse, and you have a total secure system, because that's another very big problem in the slums. This means the criminality, the mixing of the different ages, etc. And there you can have this, and the first floor can then also be used for micro businesses and for schooling, etc. So in other words, a small paradise that we try to develop with this hamlets type of, and that protects, of course, against neighboring fruit harvesters, let's say.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Michel Loots. I think we're getting very close to the end of the session, but we still want to squeeze one more question before we closing up. You know, Glaze is like many other business organizations, actually willing to help to build a structure in place to help a sharing economy business, just like yours, the Tridealhouse. So, you know, we're just interested from your point of view, you know, what are some of the challenges that you have presented in the past that you think business organizations, chambers, or business associations may be able to help you a bit more to overcome that? I know you mentioned government, university, but just something else particular you can think of.
Okay. Yeah. So my experience is that you have a lot of people of goodwill in many organizations, but not all the organizations, and even bigger ones, are really tailored in helping the UN and the SDGs in general. So I think it would be already very good if people realize the OECD and other the official development organizations, they commit that the Western countries provide 0.7% of their GDP as development aid. But I think any rich organization, this means any industry which is relatively successful, should also allocate 0.7% of its added value to helping, and it doesn't matter if it's helping elderly people around the corner or internationally. But so if we would have a view on those organizations who want to commit to help, this is already a very big part of the filtering which is done in advance, because many of them, they're struggling to survive themselves. So I'm not kind of blaming, but then they get caught in their survival strategy, whereas even with our bad economies in Belgium, we still give 0.5% in development aid. So we would like to identify those organizations who are willing, despite ups and downs in the economy, to support projects like ours. Because if we succeed, the potential is enormous, and we are not asking charity. We are asking, you know, partnerships and fair sharing of knowledge and production capacity, and developing partnerships in this way. So that is what I would like, and of course for us specifically in those materials which we will need.
Thank you so much. We really kept that really good thought. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, Dr. Michel, for your brilliant presentation and answers on the sustainable solutions on happy living, urban food production to help solving the problem of poverty. So I'd like to invite you to think about a message that you like to our audiences to take away from this session. So like that, I'll give back time to you, right? So if anyone have any further questions to ask Dr. Michael, you can reach out Glaze through our social media platform, and also welcome you to join our next session on November the 18th. We'll let you know shortly what the topic is. So Dr. Michael, back to you.
Yeah, well, for most of world problems, and sometimes the world looks not so nice, but in fact, for most problems, there are solutions. So I invite everyone to be inspired to contribute how he can, then to find the information with what he has to contribute, and then to go for it, even in a very small way, 0.7% of the time or of the resources to make something. So if this happens, I think the world would already be much better place.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Loots. And thank you, everybody. We'll be seeing you on our next session. Have a good day, good morning, good evening, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.